Chapter 11. You can get to know a lot about someone from the books they collect. Even if they haven't read them, the various titles likely reflect that person's interests, tastes, or even their profession. After replacing the book I had just finished to its spot on the endless shelves, I selected another to help pass the time during tonight's watch. As I passed Lily's door, I noticed it was closed, and I could see light coming from under it. I lingered there for a while, and seriously considered knocking but decided against it, seeing as how I had nothing to say. I appreciate her company, even if neither of us could think of anything to talk about. Upon opening the door to the outside, I was greeted with a blast of cool, crisp air. As I always did, I set my gear down and lit a fire. I immediately felt the heat through my sweater, and I stood up and began to pace. I enjoyed the moment. It wouldn't be long before the nights were filled with summer humidity. It was funny how a small thing could poison my mind and not let me focus on anything else. What I needed was for something better to take its place. I glanced over the wall to check if there was any activity through Lily's window. The lights were out, so I took a seat on the opposite side of the roof and looked toward where I had seen the footprints. I wondered what the odds were that someone was watching me right now from the trees. But as far as I could tell, tonight was going to be as uneventful as every other night. I finally took my usual seat next to the fire, propped up my feet, and obsessed about the prospect of being watched. The sound of a slamming door spooked me. Without turning, I silently wished it would be Lily and not Saul. But from the sound of the heavy boots slamming against the stone, I knew instantly it was him coming to cure his sleepless night. He always said my conversations were so dull it was better than a warm glass of milk when he couldn't sleep. "You weren't sleeping again, were you?" he asked, tossing a few extra logs on the fire. "I heard something in the woods last night," I blurted out. At first I thought it was just a deer, but after it darted out of the woods I still heard something moving around. I followed the buck's trail and stumbled upon a set of footprints. Someone's been watching us. I traced them back to the street before I lost the trail. I waited for Saul to respond, but all he was concerned with was filling his glass from the decanter he brought with him. "Okay, so they are gone, then?" he asked before taking a swig. "Wow, that's good stuff." He set the glass down on the table next to his chair and leaned back. "You're not concerned?" I asked in surprise. "No. I knew that would happen. A few months ago I found prints in the snow on the other side of the property. Why do you think I told you to keep a watch? Now you expect me to be surprised when it turns out someone stumbles on the house? Of course they would eventually. Probably just a random hunter, wandering a little too far off the state land." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Nothing," he said coldly. "What can we do? So someone was wandering around at night. Creepy, sure, but ultimately not a surprise. As long as they stay away from the house and my chickens, who cares?" After a moment, I said, "Well, I guess it's a good sign that there are people around at least." "Of course there would be. It's the isolation that's making you jumpy. Just because you haven't seen anyone besides Lily and me in months doesn't mean the rest of the world isn't going about its usual business. Now all of a sudden you see a footprint and are freaking out." He smiled at me before draining his glass and promptly refilling it. "I agree we need to be cautious, think things through. But most importantly, not overreact." "Wow, nothing phases you, does it?" I asked. "Not really. I'm retired." "So you think we should go to town? Maybe go grocery shopping or something?" "Heavens, no," he blurted out. "Don't be foolish." "So then what?" I asked. "You know the Spanish flu plagued the world, making laps around the globe for 3 years before it finally died out. What makes you think this will be any different? You came here to find isolation. Well, you found it. I think you should just keep doing what I told you to do months ago. Stay awake and keep an eye out for anyone who approaches the house. If that happens, grab Lily and wake me up. Then we'll deal with it together." You're just like everyone else in this world, always curious, always thinking the grass is greener on the other side. Eventually, we will have to leave, I said, starting to feel like a broken record and remembering the conversation Lily and I had on the subject earlier. I think we'll be forced to sooner than you would like. If we go now versus when we're forced to, then at least we'll be able to leave on our own terms and not when we're starving in the middle of winter. Look, Vince, all I'm saying is, there's no harm in waiting a little while longer. Do you have something urgent you need to attend to back at your apartment? Are you worried your cable or electricity is shut off? A job to get back to? What's the problem with waiting? You have everything you need here. You don't need to leave, you're just curious. Saul slouched back into his chair while he waited for an answer. I guess I'm sick of just sitting around waiting for the present to catch up with the future. All it would take is a quick trip into town to satisfy our curiosity. My thoughts lingered on my flu tracking app. If only I had an internet connection to update its info, then at least I would know for certain if things were improving or not. Saul was a survivor, a lion, the type of person who always came out on top. One thing I never asked myself was how long he would go before he ventured out. He was just as content to stay put and could die a happy man, not ever knowing what happened to the rest of the world. Saul? He turned and looked at me through the flames of the fire. Remember when my mom died, and you ran me into the ground so that I wouldn't get complacent and I would be able to move on? I asked. Yeah, he said. Well, it occurs to me that you never did that, I pointed out. When your wife died, you just shut down and isolated yourself. Maybe leaving would be good for you, but not just leaving to go to town, perhaps getting out of here. To some people, retirement is a death sentence. Maybe you should go back to the city with Lily and me. There was a moment of silence as he considered my words. That may be true, but not just yet. To be honest, I think isolating myself was a mistake. I like having you guys here. The house feels like home again. The sounds in the kitchen in the morning, everyone getting ready for the day, or ending them, in your case. I like our routine. I was secretly hoping you guys would stick around even after this whole thing blows over. Wow, you've changed. You'll eventually miss your peace and quiet, though, I retorted. Maybe. I must be getting old. He stood to head back into the house and gathered his decanter and empty glass. Good night. I straddled the parapet wall, one foot firmly on the ground while the other dangled over nothing but empty space, and looked toward Lily's window and wondered just how much time I had. How long would it be before our supplies ran out? Or was Saul right? Could we stay put and simply do without? As far as we could tell from turning on the TV from time to time, there was no activity outside the boundaries of the property, and the radio wasn't any better. But knowing now that people were wandering around so close to the house didn't help my own curiosity. Hopefully the footprints were just from another person out hunting for his dinner and nothing more. Somehow, though, I seriously doubted it. Lily also had a strong curiosity, and one day it might lead her away from us. She and I weren't prisoners, and this wasn't a prison. The fate of my yacht also gnawed at me. That at least was a curiosity I could manage easy enough. After all, if gas was as scarce as it had been when I came up here, my boat would likely be our only way of leaving this place. I grabbed my rifle and backpack and walked down the stairs, through the gym, and past the big double doors to the hallway that led to the shelter. Making a quick stop by my room, I dumped out the contents of my pack. At some point, it had become my own personal junk drawer. Most of it wouldn't be needed, nor did I really remember how most of it even ended up in there. After trying to imagine all the scenarios that I could face, I started adding miscellaneous items that might be useful along the way, making sure to keep my tablet. When I decided I was as prepared as possible, I shrugged my shoulders, slung on my backpack, and left my room. I don't know why I put so much thought into this little side trip. There were only two scenarios possible. Either I would find the yacht where I left it, or it sunk. Either way, it would be a valuable piece of information if we ever did want to leave. "Now's as good of a time as any," I said quietly to myself, and walked down the long hallway that led to the garage. I climbed the stairs two at a time in a hurry to get this trip over with, and selected the Jeep closest to me. "Where do you think you're going?" Saul asked. Stunned, I turned around to see him standing in the corner, as if he was waiting for me. He reached into a stainless steel box hanging on the wall and grabbed a set of keys. "Just down the road to the beach, quick, to see if our boats are still there or if they sunk," I said quickly. "That's it?" He stepped close to me as he handed me the keys to his Jeep. "Yeah," I confirmed as I accepted the keys. "Promise me you won't go to town," he said firmly. "Okay, I promise," I answered, confused. He backed out of the way. "Hurry back." I shook my head, thinking his sudden insistence was strange. The top was down in the Jeep, so I threw my pack in the back and my rifle on the passenger seat, pressed the garage door opener, and turned the key. It started right up without protesting. With a nod to Saul, I shifted into gear and pulled out. I kept the lights off, so I was well hidden by the willows to prevent Lily from waking up. I was still able to see Saul in my rearview mirror as the door closed and the house disappeared behind me. Once in the forest, the trees blocked out the moon's rays and forced me to turn on the lights. The unkempt willow branches slapped the top of the Jeep as I passed under them and navigated through the twists and turns of the driveway. Once past the half-open gate, it was not far to the end of the driveway. I stopped, remembering our pile of shrubs and brush placed there last fall, and moved enough aside for me to squeeze through with the Jeep. I stepped out on the street and looked both ways. It was only last fall when I made the trip here, but it seemed like so much had happened, so much had changed, and yet this would be the first time I left the grounds since my arrival. To the right was the small town, the direction of the fires last fall. But to the left was the beach, where I left my boat. Suddenly, with the town being such a short drive away, the boat's fate seemed of little importance. On a whim, I forgot about my promise to Saul, unable to resist the prospect of getting a little information, or even an internet connection to update my flu tracker. It was already late, and I needed to be back to the house before Lily woke up if I was to succeed in keeping this trip between Saul and me. The lights from the Jeep reflected off something metallic just off the driveway. I stepped out of the Jeep and walked toward it. Clinging to the side of a tree was another of the wire sculptures. How many times had Saul driven past it and probably never noticed it? A mischievous expression was hammered into the copper mask, as if she was caught in the act. A single finger was over her lips. A hushed sound from the light wind blowing through the trees gave her a voice. The green glass eyes mounted in the wire glowed with excitement as they reflected the lights from the Jeep. Suddenly feeling confident, I decided to continue on toward town. Taking a deep breath of cool night air, I climbed back into the Jeep. Saul would no doubt be angry with my decision, so I'd have to keep an eye out for something to bring him back to calm him down. Would it need to be something hard to find, or something as simple as a bottle of scotch or a couple cans of coffee? I knew it needed to be more than just a simple little bar of candy. And if I returned without insight into the outside situation, he would view the trip as a failure. It's funny what we take for granted in our day-to-day lives. Something as simple as having access to news of the outside world could cure my curiosity. Things like running to the store and buying an extra gallon of milk or toothpaste were now concepts that were foreign to me. The drive to town was just as I remembered it. For the most part, it was uneventful, and if I didn't know any better, I wouldn't think anything was out of the ordinary. That was, however, until I got closer to it. The town itself had been built up immensely since the last time I was there. Chain restaurants and other stores had moved in the area and changed the landscape. I decided to pull into a large grocery store off the main highway. Aside from the busy parking lot, it looked almost normal. I would expect a parking lot to be empty at this time of night. I pulled right up to the front door and shined my lights in the storefront's windows. I turned off the ignition and stepped out of the Jeep. Listening closely for any signs of life, I grabbed my flashlight and backpack and moved closer to the main door. When I checked to see if it was open, I was surprised to find it locked and chained. I noticed one window had a hole big enough for me to crawl in. I wondered if this store would have anything left to offer me. Before I even left my apartment, long before I barged in on Saul, there were reports of stores wiped out by people hoarding food and other supplies. Between that and any looters, I didn't have much hope that there would be anything for me to glean from this store or any other. The mad dash from shoppers at the height of the flu was part of the reason things spread so fast. People were eager to get food and other supplies, even if they were sick. In doing so, they exposed so many other people. My curiosity felt foolish now that it seemed like our worst fears were confirmed. I crouched in the dark store. My thumb found the switch to the flashlight, but I decided against turning it on, as it would be a homing beacon to my whereabouts. Pausing every couple seconds to listen to my surroundings, I slowly, cautiously stepped through the store, grabbing goods that others didn't think would be worth the trouble. A couple tubes of toothpaste and miscellaneous health care items were keepers. It was obvious I was the last kid to the party. The shelves were relatively empty given the size of the store. My boots went from making a quiet tap on the concrete floor to a slurping sound with every step, amplified exponentially in this environment. Broken jars were strewn about, which suggested a frenzy of shoppers once the crap had hit the fan. The air was thick with the smell of rotten produce and other perishables not seized in time before they spoiled. Some of the shelves were tipped over, and items that were once neatly stacked on them were now all over the floor. As I zigzagged through the mess, I grabbed what little I could find. I turned on my flashlight once I reached the back of the store, as the light from my Jeep was lost among the shelves. The shadows played tricks on my mind, and it wasn't long before I was hearing things. I wondered when exactly the power had failed. Saul's house had its own source and was something that until now I had taken for granted. My flashlight revealed more hidden treasures tucked away under nooks and crannies, and I was almost able to fill my backpack with cans of green beans and diced tomatoes. Once I was sure I had gotten everything I could from the center aisles, I turned my attention to the corner of the store that was once a pharmacy. Instead, I stumbled on a nest. At least, that's what it looked like. A tent was set up in one corner with piles of empty cans around it. The small tent's door was unzipped, and from what I could tell, it was still in use. The blankets and pillows that made up the bed on the inside looked clean and new. Other miscellaneous gear lined the outer edges around the blankets. From the looks of it, I would guess only one person lived there. Whoever it was would most likely return. I was hoping to find more people, but somehow I thought things would look a little better than this. Deciding against sticking around for whoever lived here to return, I made my way back to the Jeep and emptied the things I found in the back seat so my pack would be empty for the next stop. I wondered if Saul was right. Maybe this trip was an unneeded risk. Just because we were isolated didn't mean the worst of this plague was over. Back in the driver's seat, I started up the truck, scanning all around as I pulled back onto the main road. The small maze of roads wormed their way around town, past all the businesses and homes, and eventually merged until only 3 of them led out of town. I encountered a roadblock by the National Guard, closer to the center of town, followed by a long procession of cars that stretched as far as I could see until the road turned. From a distance, it was clear that there was no one there. The lights of all the cars were off, and there were tracks in the mud around the Hummers that blocked the road. I decided to stop and check out the trucks to see if there was anything worth taking with me. After all, that was why I was here. I walked up to the huge vehicle from the rear, slowly, as if I was approaching an alligator. It had obviously been there a while, judging from the collection of flat tires and the layer of grime covering it. But it still had the look of a predator, lying in the weeds, just waiting to strike. These were the vehicles that always carried the troops to fulfill their orders among the citizens, and the sound of the diesel engines always preceded them. Seeing that the doors on the back were open, I took a peek at the inside for anything I might be able to use. One thing about soldiers was that they never went anywhere unprepared. A constellation of bullet holes decorated the side of the Hummer, lighting the interior and revealing that it was already picked through. Whoever rummaged through the back didn't leave anything useful behind. Empty ammo boxes lined the interior. They reminded me of children's building blocks. Disappointed, I picked through it anyway, guessing what might have been there earlier. One thing was for sure, whoever got what was in here was well armed now. I wondered if it was the same person sleeping in the grocery store. Convinced there was nothing useful for me, I left the truck. I learned my lesson early not to look in the windows. Nothing good was ever staring back at me. Whatever was in the cars wasn't worth the nightmares I would have after the fact. Now, I intentionally avoided checking on the contents of a car on the side of the road. One of the books I had read about the Spanish flu had examples of people who got on a subway totally healthy, but died before they reached their stop. As far as I could tell, that's what happened here. Sick people got into their cars and tried to leave their dying town, but were stopped. My guess was that one of the people involved in the mass exodus wasn't going to take no for an answer, hence the gunfight. But then again, I'm no detective. Just a theory.